and thank you for tuning in to CITR 101.9 FM. You are listening to Democracy Watch, the News Collective's hour-long news report, bringing you alternative and undercovered current affairs coverage from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. I'm Alex DeBoer.
I'm Christina Song.
And I'm Aidan Tong.
It's Thursday, March 15th at 5:03 p.m. We're broadcasting from UBC's Point Grey campus on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people.
Today's show features an interview with the Managing Director of Social Policy at the city's newly opened Temporary Support Centre for families and survivors affected by the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, also known as MMIWG. Mary Clare Zak talks with reporter Aidan Tong about the Downtown Eastside Healing Centre and its significance.
Next, we turn to a story on a scandal involving the UBC Geography Student Association, otherwise known as GSA, and Hillel BC. Democracy Watch reporters Olamide, Olaniyan, and Aidan Tong talks to UBC's Lawrence G.
Lawrence G, I believe.
Yes, sorry.
No worries.
About his reporting on how the geography faculty pressured the GSA into canceling an event booked at the Hillel House.
After that, we're going to turn to an interview with Thomas Davies of Climate Convergence Vancouver. Reporter Areeka Riaz, who's in studio with us, interviews Davies about a series of direct actions that took place at TD banks across Burnaby last Saturday. These actions were meant to disturb and shame TD, which is the world's largest bank investor in the Transmountain pipeline.
The show ends with a conversation on a small protest that was held in conjunction with UBC's annual Storm the Wall event. Yesterday, Democracy Watch's Areeka, in collaboration with members of Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights, the Talon, and the Social Justice Center, set up a booth to draw attention to colonial legacies and continued building on apartheid and border walls and physical barriers on Indigenous lands.
But first, we bring you headlines from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland.
On April 22nd, George Gregor Robertson will apologize for historical wrongs of past city councils. The apology is being made as part of a larger Chinatown Culture Day event. Between 2017 to 2018, the city created an advisory board of Chinese and non-Chinese experts as well as community members to help shape this apology, which was approved by City Council in November. Confronting historical racism, this apology is meant to address the fact that residents of Chinese descent weren't allowed to vote between 1886 to 1948. They couldn't hold civil employment between 1890 to 1952, and the federal head tax had hindered Chinese from coming to Canada. Past city policies also attempted to segregate public swimming areas, hospitals, and even cemeteries. An apology to Chinese Canadians was made by Premier Christy Clark in 2015.
The BC government organized 28 events across the province to gather community feedback on the subject of poverty reduction. The most agreed upon improvements were to increase affordable housing and to raise welfare rates. Many advocates who facilitated the consultations agreed that minority groups are disproportionately affected by poverty and are especially vulnerable to housing shortages as they face discrimination by landlords. Despite the consultation, some have been cautious to see the consultation process as an improvement, saying that it is easy to consult but much more difficult to implement any changes. Carla Warmold, Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, said that the government will release a report on the findings by June of this year and will formalize it into a poverty reduction strategy by fall.
BC families may be eligible to receive $350 reduction in childcare. Although not quite the $10 a day daycare program that the NDP government promised during elections, Premier John Horgan announced yesterday that families will be eligible to receive up to $350 per month for childcare. The program is starting this Sunday, April 1st, and is meant to be a stopgap to the full universal childcare that the NDP hopes to implement across the province. However, only infants or toddlers can receive the full $350, and only if they are in group care. Children who are in family care will receive slightly less, and kids between 3 and 5 will receive only up to $100.
And that story is actually interesting because when Christina was writing this headline, she looked into the actual details of this $350 program and found that it was actually not necessarily $350.
Right.
Which is, yeah.
Which I think maybe the premier forgot to mention in his speech when he announced it.
Right.
Forgot.
Yeah, when it was reported on as being $350 in the Metro News article we pulled this from, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, so perhaps the premier didn't go into those details. Kind of interesting. Next headline.
Kennedy Stewart, the NDP Member of Parliament for Burnaby, and Elizabeth May, the Green Party leader, were arrested while participating in a protest against Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion last Saturday. The company has successfully filed an injunction against protesters being within 5 meters of their facility in Burnaby Mountain. More than 170 protesters who gathered near the facility have been arrested already as a result of the injunction. Kennedy Stewart said that, quote, "I will put my body on the line," unquote, to protest the pipeline, which will go through his riding. One of Kinder Morgan's pre-existing pipeline in Burnaby had burst in 2007, spraying 11 homes and forcing the evacuation of 250 people. He says many of his constituents fear that their property values will plummet and that another oil spill is only a matter of time. The MPs are expected to receive fines or jail time.
Yeah, that was big news on the weekend. I remember getting a text from Ryan Patrick Jones that Elizabeth May was arrested. Yeah.
That's pretty heroic.
Yeah.
And those were the headlines from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. Thank you for listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. We'll be right back with more local undercovered news after this short break.
Everybody dance, dance. What, you don't like to dance? Everybody dance. Everybody, God, this is awful. Isn't there anything?
So you're a member of CITR and Discord, but are you a true
Listening
friend?
to the radio these
Get a
days
Friends
can
of
be
CITR and
stressing.
Discord card for $20
Fortunately, here at
for discounts
CITR,
on
our
Commercial
programmers
Drive
choose the
at
music that they
Audio
play,
Pile,
so our charts
High Life
reflect what
Records,
people actually listen
Vintage,
to.
People's
To find out
Co-op
what's really
Bookstore,
topping the charts,
Stormcrow
pick up a
Tavern,
copy
The
of
Rio
Discorder
Theater,
magazine.
JQ
Check us out
Clothing
online
Limited,
at
and Bone Rattle
CITR.ca.
Music Limited.
Unless, of course, you'd rather keep listening to the chart-topping single "Everybody Dance."
What, you don't like to dance? Everybody dance. Everybody dance. Everybody dance, dance.
So you're a member of CITR and Discorder, but are you a true friend?
Get a Friends of CITR and Discorder card for $20 with discounts on Commercial Drive at
Audio Pile, High Life Records, Vintage, People's Co-op Bookstore, Stormcrow Tavern, The Rio Theater, JQ Clothing Limited, and Bone Rattle Music Limited.
And we're back. This is Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. So you just heard headlines from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, and we're now going to turn to our first interview of the night. Democracy Watch reporter Aidan Tong spoke with Managing Director of Social Policy at the city's newly opened Temporary Support Centre for families and survivors affected by the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Take a listen to the managing director and hear what she has to say about the significance and urgent need for this support center. Here we have it right here.
Allow me to tell you about Unceded Airways.
What's that?
Isn't that some kind of Indigenous radio show?
It sure is. Tell me, are you down for decolonization? What?
I certainly wish I could hear about Indigenous issues, people, and events on the radio.
You're in luck, because Unceded Airwaves talks about all these things and more every Monday morning at 11.
Music from Indigenous artists and coverage of all the hot happenings in Indigenous art and entertainment.
On CITR 101.9 FM.
Oh wow, and they broadcast all this from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people?
Find out for yourself, Monday mornings at 11, or find episodes online at citr.ca.
Today we're joined in the studio by the Cedar Program Youth.
Where you at?
Is this a significant moment in Canadian history for the families of murdered and missing women?
Yes, it is, because they've been calling for a national inquiry for a long time into missing murdered Indigenous women, and so it is actually. So it's going to be arriving here. The inquiry will take place actually in Richmond from the 4th to the 8th of April.
Okay. And so before this Healing Support Centre was initiated, where were families that have been affected by, that have had women in their lives murdered and missing, where were they getting support?
Well, one of the things that we've identified, I guess there's a couple things. One is that British Columbia has the highest number of missing and murdered Indigenous women in the country. And we know from our own experience and our own terrible tragedy in Vancouver of the missing and murdered women that Indigenous women were highly overrepresented in that tragedy. So it has impacted many families here, and friends, and sisters, aunts, brothers. So one of the things that is really critical about the centre is that there was no one place for families to go. And what we identified through our Indigenous Peoples Advisory Committee, they helped us put together a forum where we brought families, survivors, nonprofit organizations, staff from the inquiry. This happened about a year ago, to really tell us how do we best prepare and how can Vancouver, City of Vancouver, actually play a role in supporting this. And so what the decision was is that we open up a centre for this that would be open before the inquiry to help families and community members prepare during the inquiry as well as afterwards, to provide those kinds of supports, that cultural supports that people are going to be needing, because the inquiry is bound to ignite trauma again and re-traumatize people. So we just need to keep people as well as we can.
So I understand, the support center, it's aimed to help families and survivors with emotional needs as well as cultural. Can you explain to our non-Indigenous listeners what the cultural aspect includes?
Well, I think your non-Indigenous listeners would be interested in knowing that Vancouver has probably 500 different Indigenous groups represented across the country, 500 different nations. We're the most diverse area in terms of Indigenous population. And each of those nations would have slightly different, cultural practices, languages, and traditions. And what we're trying to do in this space is actually provide a mix of those so that it's more representative. What's really, really important for Indigenous people is their worldview is one that captures mind, body, and spirit. And so the cultural and spiritual component of life is really, really integrated into every day, as well as connection to the land. So this is all part of Indigenous practice and ways of being and ways of healing and better connecting actually with themselves and with each other.
One thing I just want to build on, you said earlier. So right now across Canada, there's only 41 women's shelters for Indigenous women across the country. and this temporary space which supports families and survivors affected by the national inquiry into missing and murdered women, is this only going to be a municipal initiative, or is this happening across the country?
Well, at each inquiry, there have been some additional supports for families provided right at the inquiry, but only during the actual week that the inquiry is on. So this is actually the first, we're the first municipality to step up and provide a longer time for this service to happen. But truth be told, what we actually really do need in Vancouver and are working on is an actual healing and wellness center for Indigenous people, and I would say more than one of them in Vancouver. Other cities do have them, and it's something that Vancouver doesn't have yet.
Okay. And so, I mean, this facility, it signifies tangible actions that contribute to a positive reconciliation effort. And besides the healing facilities that you've just said that Vancouver should implement, what other concrete actions can the City of Vancouver do to build on this momentum?
Well, I think one of the things, like I said, is to look at the space that's providing these cultural and healing supports as a date or a path leading to a healing and wellness center in Vancouver. And like I say, there needs to be more than one. So that's a really, really important piece. But the other things that we are working on with the province of BC and with the federal government and with Indigenous community partners are things like Indigenous housing being really, really critical, and trying to support things like job training and employment placement. Those are the kinds of things that the Indigenous community and urban Indigenous community is calling for as well.
Okay. Last question. We're just wondering, how's the facility operating now? Has there been an influx of people coming in?
Well, this was our initial opening week, and we're scheduling programming, and there's activities taking place right now. So access to counseling, there's button blanket making happening right now. And for next week, there's a whole program and schedule that will be available and sent out to our partner agencies so that they can refer people, and people can come every day and see what activities are going to be taking place at the center. And there's also opportunity for people to register for the inquiry if they haven't done so yet. So the National Inquiry is also participating with us, yeah.
Okay, so what's the atmosphere being in the facility like?
The atmosphere? Well, this is interesting. The facility used to be the Downtown Eastside Women's Center, and they moved into a larger facility just around the corner from 44 East Cordova. And the facility itself had been empty and vacant for at least a dozen years. So in opening it up, one of the things that we asked was that an elder come and do a traditional ceremony. And that's how we came up with the name Saa-ust, which means to lift up. It means uplifting, because what he felt in the space was the idea of a young woman sort of ushering out the older people that were in there and saying it's now time for us to lift up and to lift up our people. So that's why the name Saa-ust came up. And the other thing about the space is that there are a number of panels of Indigenous artists who did some beautiful, beautiful work, paintings, and all of them tell really profound stories. Some of them also had impacts of their own relatives having died or gone missing. So it is a very profound space in that way.
That's beautiful. Mary Claire, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it.
Happy to be on your show. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Mary Clare Zak, the Managing Director of Social Policy at the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Healing Center downtown. As she mentioned, the national inquiry will be taking place in Richmond from April 4th to 8th. We're now going to turn our attention to a feature reported on and produced by Democracy Watch comrades Olamide Olaniyan and Aidan Tong. In this piece, we learn about a dispute involving the UBC Geography Student Association and Hillel BC, UBC's largest campus Jewish association. This story was originally reported in the UBC by Lawrence G., who is included in this piece. Take a listen. It's coming up right now. Here we go.
There's been quite a bit of news this week about an ongoing kerfuffle between the Geography Department and Hillel BC.
Yeah, last week, the Geography Student Association cancelled their year-end gala for March 22nd at the Hillel House on UBC. Pretty normal stuff, right?
Yeah, totally. So, what's the big deal?
Well, it soon became apparent, a UBC article published a few days ago, March 26, that the cancellation was allegedly due to some pressure from faculty members of the Geography Department and executives of the Student Association.
What started off as a mundane regular planning of a private event turned into something more.
Yeah, since then, UBC has launched an investigation, which started on March 15th, into the incident.
Okay, so let's start from the top. I understand that there are emails.
Yeah, so Democracy Watch obtained a string of emails. According to these emails, the Geography Student Association sent out an email RSVP to the faculty of the Geography Department on February 13th. This email was also sent out to all the execs of the association. It was sent to geography undergraduate students as well as graduate students too. So what seemed to be non-problematic with the GSA turned out to be controversial for some of the geography faculty.
Wait, so what was so controversial about this move?
Yeah, pretty much. The individuals in this email chain disagreed with the politics of Hillel BC, but the first response to the RSVP invite was Derek Gregory, who is a Peter Wall Distinguished Professor. He said in the email, "I'm sorry, but nothing will ever induce me to cross the threshold of Hillel House. I'm deeply disappointed that the Geo Gala is taking place there." Other opinions were vocalized as well within this string of emails. There was more of a neutral response from Grace Newton. She writes, "I want to remind you that there is a fine line between legitimate criticism of Israel's policies and anti-Semitism, and I don't want to see this discussion become the latter. Please think about whether you are holding Jewish folks to a level of ideological purity that you don't expect from other groups." Yeah, so that was one of the only different responses to Derek Gregory's email, but the majority of the geography faculty within this email chain did agree with him. This conversation, however, has really garnered backlash, but the comments seem to be open-ended with no direct attack on Jewish culture. Many people are kind of interpreting it differently though. So what happens next is interesting. The cancellation of the booking is also receiving backlash from some in the Jewish community at UBC. Ben Falstein, a Jewish student and former vice president graduation, resigned from the Students Association soon after. He subsequently filed an investigation into the matter with UBC.
According to a petition statement from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, CIJA, Falstein resigned, quote, as a result of these discriminatory actions. They went on to say that, quote, boycotting Jews or a Jewish organization because you reject Israel's right to exist or because you hold Jews collectively responsible for the state of Israel's policies is textbook anti-Semitism.
Another Jewish organization, the Progressive Jewish Alliance at UBC, PGA, had a somewhat more neutral stance. They released a March 16th Facebook statement saying that, quote, while we wait for a statement from the GSA, we would like to point out that the ramifications of the decision are alienating Jewish students on campus. Likewise, we encourage Hillel to consider how their political positions, such as an opposition to all boycotts of Israel, can alienate other Jewish and non-Jewish organizations and students.
Interesting. I understand that the PGA is referring to Hillel International Standard of Partnership, right? I know it's like a lot to unpack, but basically it affirms Hillel's refusal to partner with, house, or accommodate organizations that deny the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish and democratic state, delegitimize or demonize Israel, or support the boycott of, divestment from, or sanctions against the state of Israel.
Yeah. There are growing polarizing views when it comes to criticism on the state of Israel, and this is seemingly becoming more apparent within the Jewish community, with some groups like Hillel sensitive to the idea of criticizing Israel.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully the investigation reveals more information about the incident. What has Hillel said about this so far?
Yeah, I know that Ariella Carmel, program coordinator at Hillel House, gave a statement in the UBC article for the investigation. She said, quote, "I have every faith in the university that the investigation will be carried out properly, but it would be very disappointing and it would normalize the idea that Jewish spaces can be boycotted on this campus if that investigation proved fruitless and if it didn't bring about any results."
There's also a statement from the UBC External Relations VP, Philip Steenkamp, in the same UBC article. He said, "We are looking into this matter and will follow due process to ensure it is appropriately addressed." I understand you spoke to Lawrence G., the journalist who wrote the story for the UBC about the dispute.
Yeah, I did. He covered the story with this Hillel Geography Department conflict, and he actually found it very difficult within the interview process just because a majority of the people involved in this dispute did not want to be interviewed.
Okay, let's take a listen.
So there are many things that were problematic with the interview process. So I reached out to quite a few people. So who I reached out to included the GSA co-president, Hillel's program coordinator, Ariella Carmel. I also reached out to Ben Feldstein, who was the first GSA member who dropped out of the executive committee. And only Ariella was willing to talk with me. And the GSA were, I reached them multiple times for a comment or an interview. At first they were willing to talk, and then they changed their mind quite abruptly. And I asked them a couple times afterwards if they could provide a statement or any comment or anything, and they didn't want to. And Ben couldn't talk because of investigation procedures, apparently. And I also reached out to the geography faculty. They did not want to talk either. They referred me back to administration, actually, which I also reached out to. They just gave me a regular copy paste. Oh, we're looking into this kind of email. Nothing significant, but they're aware of the issue. So the thing that struck me as interesting was the GSA and the geography department sent me they sent me the exact same references as to who to contact instead. So it kind of seemed like they were coordinating their PR. But other than that, it was just nobody really wanted to talk except Ariella.
I mean, so to only get interviews from one side, was this a difficult story to write for you then?
It was very difficult because I could only cover such a narrow perspective. I really tried to get the other side to talk, the accused to talk, like the GSA, because it was an accusation of anti-Semitism. I was thinking they would probably like to say something, like give their own side of the story, but they were not willing to say anything.
Makes sense that the reporting process was difficult because of the pending investigation. Very few people from the parties involved, the Geography Department, the GSA, the Hillel House, and UBC, want to comment on the situation currently, and most of them declined to be interviewed.
For now, I guess we'll just have to wait to see what happens in the next few weeks, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
All right, I'm Olamide Olaniyan.
And I'm Aidan Tong, reporting for Democracy Watch at 101.9 FM.
Let's see here. God. Oh. Everybody dance, dance. What, you don't like to dance? Everybody dance. Oh. Everybody. God, this is awful. Isn't there anything?
Listening to the radio these days can be distressing. Fortunately, here at CITR, our programmers choose the music that they play, so our charts reflect what people actually listen to. To find out what's really topping the charts, pick up a copy of Discorder magazine or check us out online at citr.ca. Unless, of course, you'd rather keep listening to the chart-topping single, Everybody Dance.
What, you don't like to dance? Everybody dance. Everybody dance. Everybody dance, dance. What, you don't like to dance? Everybody.
And we're back. You're listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM, the News Collective's weekly undercovered current affairs program. Today, we've heard headlines from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, as well as interviews with the director at the DTES Healing Center built for families and survivors of MMIWG. We also listened to a story on the debacle between the UBC Geography Department and Hillel BC. We now turn our attention to an interview with Thomas Davies of Climate Convergence Vancouver. Reporter Areeka Riaz interviewed Davies about a series of direct actions that took place at TD banks across Burnaby last Saturday.
Yeah, so just to clarify, as Alex was mentioning earlier, TD Bank is the world's largest bank investor in the Transmountain pipeline. So basically on Saturday, protests were occurring at all 7 of TD Bank's Burnaby locations, and protesters of Climate Convergence cited that their aim was to basically deliver letters to each bank manager demanding that TD Bank divest the $731 million that they've committed to Kinder Morgan as of now. And so their actions were meant to disrupt and also publicly shame TD, particularly in front of customers that were actually in the bank, to detract business away from TD. So while the protesters had only meant to peacefully deliver their letters and announce their purpose within the banks, things took a disturbing turn as they were immediately bodily confronted with security upon entering the first bank. Let's take a listen to Thomas.
A big security guard out front who refused to let us enter the building, even though he said the only thing that we're doing right now is delivering this letter that we've all signed, calling on TD to divest from the Kinder Morgan pipeline. So they refused to let us access. They said, we'll talk. A representative from TD Bank will come out and meet you guys at the front to receive the letter. And so we waited a while longer. And then they came back with kind of the head of security, and he said, no one's going to come out to meet you. If you want, I'll take the letter. So we said at that time that we're not here to deliver a letter to a security guard. We think it's important that TD knows that we were here and what our concerns are. We're not here to break any windows. We're just here to deliver a letter, and you guys should give us access to the building. And they said no. So this had taken about 20 or 30 minutes, and then we kind of made a collective decision that the letter needed to be delivered. So the big security guard was opening the door for patrons of the bank, and when that happened, myself and a couple other people kind of slipped past. And he tried to grab us and missed, and then I got inside with a letter to the front desk and was delivering it to them and was explaining to the tellers and everybody in the bank why we were there. Meanwhile, this head of security, another guy, was grabbing and pushing and shoving me, trying to get me to leave. But we were able to deliver the letter, we were able to talk to everybody inside the bank, and we were able to, I think, show what TD's kind of reaction is to people expressing their concerns. So after we delivered the letter, we left, and it was, I think, not a very smart move on TD's part. So we were able to deliver all 3 letters to all 3 banks there. The other team went to 4 other banks and actually had a security guard that followed them in a vehicle. The same guy who had grabbed and pushed and shoved me followed them from bank to bank to bank, and would run into the bank before they got out of their car, and would bring the manager out to the front to receive the letter. And the manager would receive the letter and say, "We can't talk to you."
So I guess now I have a 2-part question. First, it's very interesting how TD Bank tried to stop you from going in because, to my understanding, you were only, exercising your constitutional right to protest and to say whatever you needed to say. And so do you think that them reacting the way they did worked out better for the goals of I guess, the protesters? Have you been getting a lot of media coverage that I guess is making TD Bank look bad, or?
Well, I'd say yes. If I was TD Bank, I wouldn't do what they did. But I think it shows how these corporations respond to genuine concerns. Because, like I said, we've been doing that for a year. They know that we're very disciplined in our approach. We just want people to know that they have absolutely no concerns about safety or security of anything. So to act like that and to call in extra security and to try and block us is ridiculous. And of course, that's what ended up on the evening news was that security guard trying to grab and to push me. And that's what the news cameras waited for. So I don't think it's a very good media strategy on their part, and I think they kind of adjusted it later to bring the manager out to the front door to accept it, because they looked pretty ridiculous. And we're going to keep on doing it because we know we're not doing anything wrong, and we know that what we're doing makes sense, and that they should have to reckon publicly with what they're doing, because what they're doing affects the public in such a drastic way, especially in Burnaby, which is one of the biggest population centers of all of Canada, and they're trying to run another dangerous pipeline right through the city.
So to my understanding of what I know from organizations like Climate Convergence Conference, if I have that right, you guys are more so directing, trying to target investors of the pipeline and not the actual company Kinder Morgan or Transmountain itself. Do you think that targeting investors can be more effective than targeting the actual pipeline company?
I think right now our perspective is that we're part of a movement. At this point, targeting and especially focused on the Kinder Morgan pipeline. We've been involved and taken some leadership in organizing some of the larger demonstrations specifically against the Kinder Morgan pipeline that have happened in the last couple of years in Vancouver. And we know right now there's tons of action and activity going on Burnaby Mountain itself, lots of arrests. We've got the Watch House and Camp Cloud, and lots of really great work being done up there. So that work's being done, and we're supporting it. And so as long as they're doing that work, we're going to try and focus on other places as well. And we've seen success, and we've seen kind of really interesting outcomes come in the United States, with cities divesting from banks because of their involvement in dirty oil sands projects. So it's just one part of an overall effort to stop the Kinder Morgan pipeline, and right now it seems like something that we've been doing for a while, and we've had some success with, and we'll continue doing. They haven't responded to this specifically yet. Mm-hmm. And we're hoping to force them to do that. So hopefully that happens sooner rather than later, but we're going to keep on working till it happens.
So I just want to quickly acknowledge those protests occurred last Saturday, but between then and now, there's been a deafening silence from Vancouver media thus far. Nobody's mentioned the protests, nor has any major news outlets mentioned the aggressive bodily handling of security to Thomas. and other protesters.
Yeah, good to note. All right, for our remaining 15 minutes, we're going to focus on you again, Areeka, and a protest that you held in conjunction with UBC's annual Storm the Wall event yesterday afternoon. So this protest was created in collaboration, or at least conducted in collaboration, with members of Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights, which is a UBC group, the Talon, which is a UBC radical or more left publication, and the Social Justice Centre on campus. So, Areeka, you set up a booth to draw attention to North America's colonial legacies, the continued building of apartheid and border walls, and physical barriers built on Indigenous lands. So I think I'll turn to Aidan to kick off some questions we have for you about this protest that took place yesterday.
Yeah, so the aim of this protest seems a bit vague. Can you elaborate on what you mean by colonial legacies and apartheid?
Yeah, so, well, first off, we kind of realized that UBC has already established a platform through their recreational event, Storm the Wall, and we were like, you know what? We want to use this platform to bring attention to the building of walls on Indigenous land, especially because, like, in our event statement, we stated that, cries of "Let's storm the walls" are literally being shouted across the earth. And so there were three...
Can I interrupt you to say, for our listeners, I'm just realizing, for those who aren't UBC students, might not know what Storm the Wall is. So just to put this in context, it was like a week long or so.
Yeah, it's like 2 weeks, a week and a half.
More
and
than
basically,
that.
we have this giant wall constructed, in the middle of the university, and students, I think they have, teams of 4 or 5, and the goal is to climb the wall. And just even looking at pictures of our event where people are literally pulling each other up over this 20-foot wall, it's eerily reminiscent of border walls from Mexico to Israel, and the same thing is happening. People are trying to cross those illegally built walls. So 3 causes that we specifically wanted to bring attention to. The first being the apartheid wall in Israel, which was built by the Israeli government in areas of occupied Palestine. One of the walls is literally enclosing the Gazans of Palestine within 3 border walls. Citizens generally can't enter or exit. The wall is also being built around the occupied West Bank. Palestinians are also regularly, arbitrarily detained and imprisoned at these border wall crossings. The second wall we wanted to bring attention to was the U.S.-Mexico border wall that was also built on stolen Indigenous lands. And actually, the plans to build that wall are being they're not being funded, but they're being engineered by companies who were directly involved in the building of the Israeli apartheid wall. And then the third one, in Democracy Watch, we've been talking about this, for weeks. The fences being built at places like Kinder Morgan in Burnaby, we likened those fences to walls because they're still being built by governments who are directly descendant from, genocidal colonizers, and they are directly encroaching on the First Nations rights on this occupied land.
Right. So to clarify then, there was this UBC recreational event, an annual event, which involves a sort of triathlon type thing. People do a few different activities, and they end up trying to climb over this wall as the final obstacle. So you saw this and took it as inspiration for a critique of colonial uses of walls and borders. Okay.
So just to clarify, we weren't really referring to the demonstration as a protest because we were not protesting UBC or UBC Storm the Wall. Rather, we were commending their effort. We love UBC Rec so much and the platform so much, and we think Storm the Wall in itself is such a powerful phrase. So we're like, you know what? Hey, this is a platform. We're going to use it to bring attention to victims of colonialism across the planet.
Okay, cool. So can you also just maybe describe what would you call it if it wasn't a protest too? And I was out there briefly and I saw you had some signs and images. Could you tell us what those were as well?
I want to say it was a demonstration, a peaceful demonstration. So me, members of SPHR, SJC, we basically had signs up, pictures of the apartheid wall. We also had this really cool poster of border walls across the planet. And, you know, there were some in France, across Asia, some being built in Afghanistan. There's like 20 to 25 walls. So we just had a lot of imagery. And the fact that that imagery was directly across the Storm the Wall was so powerful. People kept giving us looks, like, because you cannot miss the resemblance, that the pictures actually look the same.
Right.
Just exchange students for victims of colonialism.
Yeah. Right. So in your images, did you have like people trying to climb over walls? Like, not just the walls? Okay.
And not just that, like,
so it looked
other
very
people
similar.
pulling them over the wall.
Right. I see. Okay.
And, you know, security forces standing at the bottom of the wall, which I guess UBC Rec.
Right.
Not calling them out. We
Not
love UBC
saying
Rec,
that
but
they're,
yeah.
So it seems to be that this week, I guess there was a lot of friction or a lot of criticism with the Jewish community, and especially with a Hillel house. Did you encounter any opposition to your booth?
So I just want to clarify. I don't think it was the Jewish community that we're causing friction with. It's specifically the Israeli community, and not even all Israelis, just the uber Zionist Israelis. So clarify that. But I think about 20 minutes after we set up our, you know, mini demonstration and all our signs, a group of people, I think they were mostly members of the Free Speech Club on campus, which you know, also advocates for free speech and hate speech. And then we also had members of, I think, Israel on campus and maybe a couple others. But basically they had signs up saying that, so we were not a protest, but they identified as counter-protesters to us. And they had signs saying that, you know, border walls or security walls save lives, which we don't think that's true. But whether or not that is true, what SBHR and SJC were trying to bring awareness to is that colonial or settler colonial governments do not have the right to build walls on Indigenous lands.
Right. So do you think that these counter-protesters, because we've talked about your creation of this event, this peaceful protest or peaceful demonstration rather, you kind of put it together pretty quickly, right? So it was only posted on Facebook as an event, like a day before, 2 days before?
Like 3 days before.
3 days before, okay.
It's pretty
so
hectic.
do you think that these counter-protesters made these signs in anticipation of this event, specifically, or they just had them already lying around?
So not SBHR directly, but members of SBHR, and I think also
And can you clarify
us
what
here.
that is again?
Oh, sorry. Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights. We are an advocacy group on campus. So we have come in contact with this same group of people. I'm just going to refer to them as the Free Speech Club. We held an event in coalition with Amnesty International, UBC, I think a couple months ago, and they also crashed our events with the exact same signs, you know, saying security walls save lives, proud to be Zionist, stuff like that. So we expected them to come, as we know anytime SBHR or anyone holds a pro-Palestine or an event that is just explicitly advocating for Palestinian human rights, generally we get these counter-protesters, which, you know, they have the right to do, but
yeah. So what happened then? So they had these signs that said positive things about walls and how they make us safer. Did you two speak? Was there any dialogue?
We had some bystanders who, I guess they saw our cause and they were like, oh, that's so amazing. And then they went and talked to the counter-protesters and told them, you know, why they were wrong, why they're against security walls. But members of our demonstration or delegation did not go over there because we figured, you know, we had a huge crowd of people literally watching us. If we were to go over there and start arguing, it would just make our cause, you know, look a little bit bad. So we thought the most powerful thing to do was to just ignore the counter-protesters and just focus on educating and talking to as many people as we possibly could.
Cool. And do you feel like you were able to educate or enlighten any UBC students or passersby?
For sure. There were so many people who were telling me that, I had no idea that there was an actual apartheid wall in Israel. Or a lot of people they knew what Kinder Morgan was, but when we made the connection to Kinder Morgan's walls and just general border walls built by colonizers, they were just completely stunned. And that felt good, I guess, showing people that anything that is directly encroaching on Indigenous rights, we as settlers on stolen or occupied land, we kind of have a responsibility to speak out against stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, any plans for future collaborations?
Yeah, definitely. We had so much good reception on this. We want to turn this into a greater movement next year. So, Storm the Wall is 2 weeks long. We're thinking next year we want like conferences or panels from specifically Indigenous activists. Maybe we'll have updates on what's happening with Kinder Morgan by then, and then also maybe some Palestinian human rights activists, just to further get our message across to the general UBC and maybe hopefully Vancouver population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to see all these different causes unite, and the kind of connections that you made for this demonstration, because as like Aidan asked initially, it's like the things that you are drawing attention to seem vague, right? Like border walls, apartheid, but in the vagueness, you're able to bridge these different experiences and highlight the similarities between them. Yeah. So that's a really powerful thing, it seems like, and that's a tool it seems you're planning to use in the future.
We're hoping to, even extend it beyond border walls, digital walls that are restricting people's access to information. Wow. Anything restrictive that the people or specifically Indigenous people do not want.
Right. All right.
Basically.
Cool. Well, thanks for chatting, Areeka. Did you have any other questions, Aidan?
Yeah, I'm actually just wondering, has there been any setup between, how the solidarity for Palestinian human rights and, any Jewish communities or Jewish clubs at UBC? Has there been any healthy dialogue between them, just set up formally?
So, SBHR has had a couple events, I guess kind of open to the greater Vancouver community. We have worked closely with Independent Jewish Voices Vancouver, but as for on campus, one of our secretaries is also president of the Progressive Jewish Alliance, and we are hoping to hold more events with them, just to show and clarify that there's nothing remotely religious about this friction or this conflict. So hopefully we will be doing more collaboration with the PJA in the future.
Very cool. Very cool.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you, Areeka, for both contributing to the show as a reporter and an activist.
Thank you for letting me say my piece.
No worries. Yeah, here at Democracy Watch, we believe you can be both, but not necessarily at the same time. So, we try to do a little bit of both there. Great. So thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in to Democracy Watch. Please join us again next Thursday on CITR 101.9 FM. And we'll be bringing you more adversarial coverage of underreported issues across Vancouver and the Lower Mainland.